the We Wreck Records podcast. Can I scream? What do people get wrong about the story of The Shape of Punk to Come?
You are correct. It was kind of a fuck you because before Shape, we were very much like a hardcore band, like very steeped in the scene of hardcore. And it wasn't political and it wasn't adventure. It wasn't open-minded. And I mean, even though we were very much a hardcore band, like we were listening to all types of music, that world felt narrow to us. And a lot of what we did on Shape, both in aesthetics, but also the music and the lyrics and everything was like a reaction to that world that we felt like it's a little bit too narrow-minded for us. When we did Shape, I think that some of the compositions, a lot of the riffs and the way we constructed songs just felt fresh and unique because we were like, no one's really done it like this before. What is the unique idea? What makes you different from all these other bands? And I mean, that's something, I mean, still to this day, when we talk about Refused or songwriting or you know, different projects like that is the question.
I'm told it was something that people didn't quite get at the time, but the thing that I love the most about it is it just has this really crackling electricity. Hello and welcome to We Wreck Records, a brand new podcast all about wrecking the mystery around the albums that matter. Today's subject victim du jour is Refused 1998 classic, The Shape of Punk to Come. We have frontman Dennis Lyxzén here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to give a bit of background that you can then elaborate on. So Dennis hails from the frozen north of Sweden, discovered punk at 15 years old, started his first band at 17, and then started Refused in 1991 in the thriving city of Umeå in Sweden, which was allegedly called Europe's capital of hardcore in this time. Is this true?
I think when we started the band, it was not called the European capital of hardcore. I think that transpired a couple of years later when we managed to build a scene and we managed to build like a community around it, and also a place where people wanted to come and play. Because when we started, I started playing punk 1987. Yeah, I was 15, and there was no scene, there was no people, there's nothing happening. And then from 1989 to 1991, there was a really small scene, and then in the mid 90s, it exploded and became you know, the Umeå hardcore that people talk about, and that was the mid 90s. So yeah.
So that was the Shape of Punk to Come era?
No, a little bit before that. I think the shape of punk was sort of the swan song of the 90s for hardcore. I mean, not only that record, but it was like came out in 98 and we broke up.
This show is proudly presented by Distrokid, and we have a special deal for all the musicians out there looking to release their new music fast. Distrokid helps over 2 million musicians around the world release on all major music streaming platforms and YouTube. You keep 100% of your earnings, can suss a huge range of features, and if you like this show, support this show by taking advantage of this incredible offer, 30% off your first year with Distrokid. Just head to distrokid.com/VIP/WeWreckRecords. This show is presented by Grillo's Pickles. Grillo's Pickles make the freshest, crunchiest, most delicious pickles. And even if you're not a pickle fan, you should try Grillo's today. Why not? Live a little. You can find them in the refrigerated section of your local grocery store. So chill out and eat a pickle.
The record label that I was doing folded, and then the other big band from our hometown was a band called Abhinanda, and they broke up in 1999. So it was like the end of that Umeå hardcore era. I would say like 96 was probably the peak. That was our Songs to Fan the Flames of Discontent.
Yeah, well, I did really like this quote that I found on YouTube, a YouTube comment. As a Swede who was a teenager in the 90s and was into all things punk, metal and hardcore, we had a huge boom of Swedish punk bands popping up all over the country. Most were political, but they were also into drinking beer, having fun and not taking themselves too seriously. And then there was Umeå making the national news for their straight edge hardcore scene, burning down McDonald's, letting out animals out of farms and preaching a lifestyle without drugs. The kings of Umeå hardcore were always Refused long before anyone outside of Sweden knew they existed. So did you really burn down it? Did anyone really burn down a McDonald's? I love this because it feels like the black metal bands in Oslo like burning churches, you're burning down McDonald's.
So I don't think anyone burnt down a
They
McDonald's,
should have.
but when McDonald's opened in Umeå in the mid 90s, it was also one of the only McDonald's in the world then to close. Because no one went there. And then, I mean, I do think there were some, as we call them, vegan attacks at McDonald's, but it didn't really burn down. But there was definitely some, the
Unrest.
slaughterhouse of Umeå. They had a big slaughterhouse. There was a couple of slaughterhouse trucks that got burned down, and that made like national news. That was a big deal. There was a lot of animal rights activism, a lot of like mink farms being minks being released and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean it was quite a time of a lot of activism. I got into straight edge 1989. I was 17 years old, and I was one of those kids that grew up in a small town in Sweden. So drinking was a part of like the culture from when you were like maybe 14. You start drinking, and then I discovered punk and hardcore, and that kind of led me into like the straight edge thing. And I also was quite bored with what was going on around me, and I felt that a lot of the punks and a lot of the greasers, because we had a lot of greasers, they were doing the same things but just in different uniforms. And I think for me, like the ultimate, I was one of those guys that was like, how much of an outsider can I be?
Mm.
And then not doing drugs or drinking and not eating meat made me like the ultimate outsider. So it was like, for me, it was like the ultimate fuck you.
Well, there is an element of fuck you about the shape of punk to come. Like it's an album that happened in this moment that has elements of, it's got punk and hardcore, it's got jazz, it's got crazy electronic music interludes. It's one of the things I really love about this album, and which is obviously the topic of the show, is just the electricity of it. I found your band on your reunion tour. So just for a bit of background, guys, on The Shape of Punk to Come, it came out in 1998. People didn't quite get it at the time, I'm told. It was something that people didn't quite get at the time, but then has been name checked on a million best of lists and kind of came through in the end. But the thing that I love the most about it is it just has this really crackling electricity and energy. And I think that I saw you guys on that tour and I was like, wow, this is interesting and standalone and an experience. I guess what do people get wrong about the story of The Shape of Punk to Come?
It was an interesting experience, and I think you are correct. It was kind of a fuck you, because we were, before Shape, we were very much like a hardcore band, like very steeped in the scene of hardcore, and dedicated to that idea. And then one thing that happened I talked about is that we went on tour in the States in 1996 with Snapcase, and they were great, and it was a cool experience. But a lot of the hardcore scene, it wasn't political and it wasn't adventure. It wasn't open-minded. A lot of what we did on Shape, both in aesthetics, but also the music and the lyrics and everything, was like a reaction to that world that we felt like it's a little bit too narrow-minded for us.
Mm.
So I think that was it. And I mean, one of the things that we also talked about is the fact that 1997, when we were writing and recording the record, it wasn't a harmonious time for us. We were not really getting along, and we all wanted to go in different directions. But for like a magical moment in time, like those pulling in different directions made it perfect. And if we would have tried to record that record like 6 months later, it would have been a complete disaster. But that, like it is a like a
100%.
little bit of magic when you like that moment, everything came together, and it became a really cool record.
Discord can be alchemy, right? Discord can be alchemy.
Yeah.
What was the silliest musical argument you had while making it?
I remember I didn't like the riffs to one of the songs,
Mhm.
and I told someone else, and they told David and Chris, and David and Chris came to my house and we were talking, and I said I didn't like that song, and David got really upset and he screamed. I mean, I remember he screamed, "You don't understand Mingus," but he claimed he screamed, "You don't understand Charlie Parker," and and that was like the argument. Like I was a simple punk, and he was
Yeah.
like this elevated
Yeah.
jazz guy, and that
Well,
was quite fun.
you stole the name from The Shape of Jazz to Come.
No, David and Chris were really into jazz music, and I mean, that was a real thing. It wasn't like a post. They were really into jazz and really into free form music and experimental music, and that's a thing. And I mean, you could hear it on the record,
Mm.
not only like the jazz sort of interlude that we just sampled, but also like the compositions of the songs
Mm.
and the way we constructed them were pretty free and weird. And I wasn't that much into it at the time. And I some of the stuff I'm like, I don't, like when you're writing something and I'm the singer, I'm like, I don't really know what's going on right now. This is just weird. And then, and then I was like, okay, I'll do my best to elevate these songs with the lyrics and my words, and it worked out really well. But
Yeah.
there was times when we were practicing where I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And then, I came up with some cool ideas, and the records sound pretty good.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like sometimes people forget the music and everything is a vocal vehicle. Like the whole essence of pop music is a vocal vehicle, whereas something like this,
Mhm.
there's a lot more interplay. So that makes sense that we now get into the Let's Wreck the Lyrics segment. Um,
Oh,
so capitalism. There's a couple of great lines I love about yay capitalism. You say great spirits proclaim that capitalism is indeed organized crime and we're all the victims. And I got a
mm.
bone to pick with capitalism and a few to break. So
Yep.
I feel like 27 years later, it's never felt more true.
It is interesting because when you're young, I mean, we were quite young when we did the record. A lot of your political ideas and insight come from a gut feeling. But then at the point where we're doing, well, I mean, it started on Songs to Flame and then continue on to Shape. I got really, really heavily invested in politics, not only as lyrical vehicle, but also like I
As
was
a
in
person.
political groups and organizations, and I was like really, I became that guy that just said stuff like music is a bourgeois construction and it should just be a vehicle for the revolution, things like that.
It could
But
be a vehicle for the
at,
revolution.
well, I mean, it could be,
Yeah.
it could
Well, we
could
need
be
one. We need one quite
exactly,
radically. So
yeah.
yeah.
But so when writing these lyrics, like I was really heavily inspired by the French Situationist movement of the '60s, like the 1968 revolution, and I was widely pretentious in in
You're
my
one of those
approach.
guys. You're one of those guys.
Yeah, I was one of those guys.
Did you carry
I
around
had black
books and tell everyone about your ideas?
yes, and I had black nail polish, and I was like super pretentious about my political ideas. Um, and then whatever, 27 years later, can that really be true? But you go out and play these songs, and I'm singing these lyrics. I'm like, all of this makes complete sense now, and
It's terrifying.
I think some of it, I mean, most of it made sense back then as well, but I
Mm.
couldn't foresee it. I mean, there's no part of me that felt like, oh, in 25 years, these songs will still be relevant. Like, I mean, that wasn't really part of the equation at all. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like we write these lyrics. I mean, it is interesting because, as I said, like it's a moment in time. It's like from when we started writing the first song to when the record is done, it's a couple of months of our lives.
Yeah, that's wild.
And that's the crazy thing about music. It's like it's a couple of months of our lives, and it will forever define me as a person and the band.
Yep.
But you had these lyrical ideas, and I was really into it, and it's still relevant, which is I that's not really a good thing. I mean,
I have a theory, and this is just a side note. I don't know if protest does anything in 2025. I wish it did.
so here's my take on it. Music did
Yeah.
change me. It did change you. We wouldn't be here without music. Um, it changed my perspective on everything, and I think that music is for me and for a lot of people, it was that key that opened the door to a completely different world uh,
Awesome.
of art, music, politics, and everything. I mean, if you find that right key, your life will be changed forever. And that's the way it went for me. Like I discovered music, and through music, I learned everything that I know about life. Basically, just discover music, and the political aspect for me was always important. And I do think, like, I'll meet friends that I made over the years from just playing in a hardcore band, and they're lawyers and they're teachers and they work in nonprofit organizations, and they some of them even work in government. And so that changes things, it changes trajectory of life and ideas. And I think for me, music now, if music would have changed the world, it would have happened in the 50s or the 60s when it was like a mass movement, and
Yes.
you had these civil rights movement that intersected with musical movements. But I think today, and I felt that we just came back from our tour in the States, the world is a messed up place, and
It
it's really
hurts.
bleak.
It
Yeah, it's really
hurts, man.
bleak.
I do a lot of
Yeah,
crying. I'm just looking at it. I'm
yeah.
like, did we not learn anything? It's just like,
No,
yeah,
yeah. But I think that for us, it was like, I'm not gonna I'm not really going to change anyone's mind. If you are a Refuse show in 2025, you know what we're
you're on
about.
board, man. Yeah. Do you think?
Yeah, and people that are there, they know. But the fact that we're all there and we're doing this together, and it's a communal experience, and it's something that you can look at people around you and say, yeah, we believe in the same things. I'm not
Yeah.
alone in this mess. I think that's widely important, because I think that for a lot of people, you see your Twitter feed, or you see Facebook, or you see the news, and you're like, holy shit, I don't even know how to process this. And you feel really lonely. And I
Mm.
think music can be a communal place where we can get together and say, we are not alone. There's tons of us that believe these things. So in that sense, I do think musical still plays an important role. And I think that bands that
Yes.
have the guts to speak out, and bands that have the guts to still talk about relevant issues, matter. I think they do matter.
I think so too. I see a lot of it and I'm like, I feel sometimes like I can't say anything and I don't know what to say and there's all too many things to say and I really appreciate people having the bravery to talk about these things and all this kind of stuff. I feel
Yeah,
like for me like hardcore and all kind of underground music it's yeah, it's exactly what you said. It's shared values. It's
yeah.
shared, it's kind of saying that and what's interesting I think about this album is as well, it's shared musical values. Like when I heard this, I'm like, I love electronic music. I grew up with jazz nerds. I like
Yeah.
punk. I like excitement. I like New Noise, is the name of the magazine that we are doing this podcast for, and it's the name of one of the songs. It's had like 60 million plays on Spotify, which is crazy, and it's been covered a bunch of times and all this stuff. What did you mean by we dance to all the wrong songs and enjoy all the wrong moves?
I think it's like you talk about cultural expectations, and
Hmm.
how, like we're told to be a certain way, and we're expected to be a certain way. And I mean, that's just like a fancy word of saying that. Like, we dance to all the wrong songs, we enjoy all the wrong moves, and we get conditioned into to like being obedient citizens. And I was never one to be an obedient citizen, really. So I mean, I mean, for me, like when we wrote New Noise, for me, I wanted it to be like a sort of like the Who's My Generation, but for our generation, like one
Yeah.
of those songs to talked about what we were going through and how we felt, and just this world of rules and regulations that we're supposed to just accept, and we don't. And so yeah.
What were the rules? Like can we delve into like who you were in this moment? What were the rules and regulations you felt? Because honestly, I feel like the 90s like were a more optimistic time. It was like, oh, the 21st century, this is gonna be fun.
90s was a weird breaking point, because you had the 70s and 80s where you had mass movements, and you had politics that was like on a more um
Global?
no, not a global scale,
Oh,
but
opposite.
you talk more about structures, and you
Mm.
talk more about like
The system.
capitalism and how it affects. But then the 90s was very individual.
Mm.
It made sense that straight edge and veganism and queer identities and all that feminism became big in the 90s because it was more of a personal, the personal is political.
Mm.
And I was Marxist. I was someone
You
that
are a
came
raging
from
communist. Yeah.
that these big modernist stories about like how we can change the world, and that clashed with like the postmodernism of the 90s. But yeah, there was something to be said about the identity politics. It was quite exciting that people like, I'm gonna find my way, I'm gonna be this type of person. And I mean, for me it was like uh discovering not only politics but feminism and LGBTQ rights and all those things that like they came to me because that was like the political paradigm of the 90s. Like you had all these different more personal ideas, and then and I had this basic foundation of a bigger political understanding that dealt with economical, culture, social structure. So it's quite an interesting time. Unfortunately, a lot of people just dove into the personal politics and maybe didn't talk so much about the structural political aspects of it.
Mm, it's interesting. I feel like the internet played a role. Like I found a lot of feminist, like riot girl stuff when I was very, very young, and the internet was kind of an interesting thing to happen in this moment. And I think it's kind of interesting you say it's individual, but I think it's also very tribal, and maybe it
Yeah,
was like collective identity.
yeah,
But I see what you're saying. People going on their own quest, but maybe finding like-minded
yeah,
people on the same quest.
exactly. I think it was
Yeah,
more that. I think there was more like about identity more than structures
yeah,
or big political ideas. Because I mean, you had like socialism or communism or capitalism or fascism.
mm,
That's like the 1900s, like the big political ideas, and then the 90s, as you said, into the new century, it changed and it became more, as I said, postmodern, post-structuralist. You broke it down. You talked about feminism. You talk about these singular issues that are still important and still a part of a tribe, but it was a bit different than from the 1900s,
yeah.
the more big monolithic political projects, if
Yes,
that makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it's only gotten more individualistic in some ways, and like
Yes.
the whole concept of the mainstream doesn't really exist anymore because everyone, like in the age of the mobile internet, everyone's their own niche market. Everyone's
Yeah.
curating their own little universe, which is kind of, I mean, you've done some record digging. Side note.
Yeah.
There's and there is a lot of different music going on there. I read this great I've been reading a book about the Cramps and their
Oh,
absolute
nice.
quest to find the most ridiculous old rock and roll records. And they said we set out to become, Lux Interior of the Cramps said, we set out to become a patchwork hybrid, a rock and roll bride of Frankenstein. Do you relate? Was this album your Bride of Frankenstein? It was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was, as I said, it was like a couple of different people pulling in different directions,
Mm,
still managed to hold it together. And I mean, I think there was, definitely an urge to break away from what we used to be
yeah.
and what we were supposed to be, and how people perceived us, and all those things. And it did matter. And being open to other ideas. Because I mean,
Yeah.
hardcore, I love hardcore. I still love hardcore. I'm still obsessed with the idea of hardcore, but a lot of hardcore pulls from the same source. And when we did Shape, every source was available for us. And I think for me, and I mean, I know it's the same thing for David. Like for me, punk and hardcore became this thing that made everything possible. It wasn't because I mean, I have friends and I love these friends, but they discovered punk and hardcore, and for them, it's like a small closet that they're going to spend their life in. And they're
As a
like,
lot of
this
people
is
feel like
my
that.
fucking, this is my little room.
This is
But
my
for me,
place.
punk and
Yeah.
hardcore blew the walls off, blew the roof off. And I'm like, anything is possible. And me and David had that approach that anything is possible. You can do anything. And that's kind of in the spirit of punk and hardcore. It's different approaches. I love my conservative punk friends. They're fucking
It is
amazing,
kind
but
of conservative
I'm
now,
not
isn't
one of
it?
those.
What is hardcore? What are the rules and which ones did you need to break? I don't know. I want you to explain it.
I
You
don't
know
I
this.
don't know.
Yeah, how do you explain it? It's like punk's weird bastard kid. Like,
I mean, hardcore came as a reaction to punk. It
yeah,
just wanted to be more faster. It wanted to be more concise, and also maybe get rid of some of the more self-destructive elements of punk.
yeah.
Um,
Like what?
I mean, in the beginning, hardcore was it just meant you were a hardcore punk. That's kind of what it was. Like you're a hardcore punk. Like you're punk, but you're a bit more hardcore about it.
Yeah,
And then I mean, hardcore splintered off into 25 different ideas, and it's
yeah.
everything from guys in baseball hats doing like beatdown parts, and then it's like old school hardcore that just repeats Black Flag for the millionth time, and anything in between. And I think that's the cool thing about it. Like I'm I'm of the opinion that hardcore music has never been more interesting than right now.
It's
Like
so interesting.
it's
There's
so
so and
interesting.
there's a lot of different like gender splits and like lots of
Yes,
different kinds of voices and kind of like speaking to the shape of punk to come. It is the bastard children because there's no rules. There's a lot less rules in a lot of the
yes,
really great
yeah,
bands. Like
yeah,
a lot of the
and,
bands
and
doing
I
really interesting stuff.
yeah, and I love that. I love that hardcore is anything from like you have like really true to form like old school hardcore bands that just like the way they dress, the way they sound, the way the record looks. It could have been released in 1982. And then you have bands like Speed from Australia, and then you
Yeah.
have Scowl, and then you have High Vis, and then you have Turnstile. And it's just like I'm like, oh, it's so interesting because as you said, a lot of these bands are like, oh, I love old school hardcore and I love Billie Eilish. Let's start a band. I'm like, that's we could never have done that. We were so
Well, you started it. You started it. Like when did
well
it? Yeah.
when we started our band, we want
Yeah.
to sound like Gorilla Biscuits. That was
But
it. That
that's
was
tribal. That's the tribal thing again. You're a part of a
yeah,
tribe. Now no one has
yeah.
any tribe. They're just out there doing their weird thing. And also
And
like
yeah,
music now has no time period. Like if you're 15, you just get into everything that's happened in the
yes.
last 200 years at once.
Yeah, no.
And I feel
Yeah.
like that may be why people are doing it. There's no rules, there's no tribes, there's just all crazy like so I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, people didn't from I wasn't there, but people didn't seem to get it at the time. But then when did it start to cut through that people were resonating with it? And when did you first start to see the tide sort of turn and people really connect with the album?
I would say maybe 2 years after we broke up. Because
That's
when,
so annoying.
yeah, no, it's interesting. Like
Yeah.
when we did the record, we knew that because I mean, we were so much like a hardcore band.
Yeah.
No matter what we thought about ourselves, like that was our world. Those were the bands we played with. That was our crowd.
Yeah.
And putting out a record like Shape of Punk and then going on tour with that, a lot of like the hardcore kids were like, who are these pretentious assholes? They were not interested in what we were doing,
Mm.
which makes complete sense. And I always say that. I mean, it takes time for your mind to open up, and it takes time for things to change. And I mean, we changed fast. Um, but then the record started getting traction. And I think one of the big parts was that like MTV2 started showing the New Noise video in the States, and then people start talking about it. And then, the myth spread because we've broken up by that point.
Yes.
So 2 years after we broke up, like I was touring with Noise Conspiracy, and everyone's like, Refused. I love Refused. I'm like, wait, what's happening right now? Like it's quite interesting. And then, you saw we were standing on the sidelines watching our band just take off. And it
That is
was
very
quite wild.
disturbing.
No, it was
Disturb
kind of cool
well,
as well. You're
okay.
like that, yeah.
It's not terrible to suddenly to have a record that yeah people 20 years later are like Dennis, I really want to know more about this because I really love it and it's fucking cool and it still sounds
Yeah.
fresh and interesting. Okay, here's some myths to wreck. Refused broke up dramatically on stage at their final show. Is this true?
Yes, that is true.
Tell me the
In a
story of
Harris,
that night. What happened?
we
Okay.
broke up like 5 days before that show. We had a band meeting in Atlanta, Georgia, and we said, we were debating whether to continue the tour.
Mm,
And I said something like, if we don't continue the tour, then the band's done. And everyone's like, oh yeah, I guess the band's done. I'm like, oh no, that didn't work out at all. And then we had to play. We didn't have any money, so we just had to play a couple of shows to get back to DC so we could fly home.
mm.
So we broke up and then we played 5 or 6 shows maybe.
That's
And the last show was in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and in a basement in front of 50 people. And we were quite nervous about how do you tell people like, oh, this is the last show, like we're done. Like we broke up a couple of nights ago, but this is it. And then in Rather Be Dead, the cops came and shut it down, and it was great. Great for the mythology of the band, but also great for us because we were like, oh no, we don't have to tell people that it's done because now it is done, you know?
it's really done. It got shut down by the
Yeah,
cops.
it's really done.
Have you ever been arrested at another time?
Yes, but
Yeah, what was it for?
for different reasons.
Will you divulge them, or is it fun?
No, it's just petty vandalism.
Petty vandalism. Well, everyone's you gotta have your brush with the law. That's the
Yeah,
whole.
yeah, yeah.
Did what? Okay, wreck this. The album not having a big impact when it came out was a reason you broke up, or was it just musical?
No,
No.
no, we were done. We were done. I mean, the record, because this is a misconception, because the record came out in February in Scandinavia and Europe. So we actually toured the record for like almost 6 months to no real luck. Like no one really cared. People
Yeah.
were like, pretentious assholes, what are you doing? And then we went to the States to tour, and we were supposed to go to Australia, and we were supposed to do a Scandinavian tour. Right before the US tour, we canceled Australia, and the writing was on the wall already. We were not getting along. We were not having a good time, but we're like, let's go to the States and see if we can have
Yeah.
fun. And we did not have fun. So the writing was on the wall, but we did break up. And then the record came out in the States like a week after we broke up.
That is pretty wild. That is weird, fortuitous. Well, not fortuitous.
Yes, yes.
It's not
Yeah.
really fortuitous. It's like it's it is an interesting situation. Um,
Yeah.
More lyrics. Protest song 68. I breathe and I create, rework the spirit 68. Breathe out and I scream, rework the
Dream.
Malitester's dream. Okay,
Okay.
so I
Yeah,
looked up Malatesta. He's like this radical anarchist dude who got kicked out of 4 countries and all that kind of stuff. Why did you give him
Yep.
a shout out? How did you find him in all
I
your
love radical anarchist dudes.
yeah?
And especially at that point, as I said, I was so heavily into radical politics. I was so heavy into like these ideas of revolution, and yeah, he was quite the famous Italian anarchist that killed fascists.
That's pretty
All
well.
good.
We need those.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's all you need.
we really need them right now. This is a sore
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. True
How did
story.
how did sort of the bigger picture, like lyrical story of the album come together? Like how did you approach it? Because it does feel like there's a real thread through it. So I'm
Yeah,
interested to
but
say, yeah, to see like, did you kind of do it? Yeah, how did the birthing of the thing happen? How was
but
it gestated?
as I said, I was like really into radical politics, especially like 68 in Paris and France, where they had almost had a real revolution. And I was just really into that idea. And then I wanted to create, lyrically, I wanted to create a work that was like super radical and really sort of taking politics to a different level. And I mean, it is also, as I said, it's quite pretentious. There's a lot of reference to
Like
the
that guy.
political idea. Yeah, like to that guy and other stuff. So it's like that's just how it went about. I mean, that's where my mind was at the time. And as I said, I was moving in circles with a lot of radical leftists, and
Mm.
a lot of my friends were like proper wild anarchist. So that just how it came about. And I think I didn't, maybe I didn't think about it that much then, but I think the overall theme of the sprawling sort of tapestry that is the music, it does make sense to have lyrics that are also quite pretentious and quite these big themes and these big ideas. And I think it makes sense for the music. And sometimes that happens subconsciously. Like you'll hear a song and you connect a certain emotional state to that song, and you're like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense just because of the vibe of the music. Because I mean, usually it was I'm not a guy that writes
Yeah, how do you
tons of
write?
lyrics.
Yeah, how do you write?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I get songs usually with all my bands. That's usually how it happens. Like I get demos, I get songs. I mean, in '97, I got cassettes from the rehearsal space, and then I just sat and I'm like, mull it over and come up with cool ideas. And
Oh,
that's usually how I write. So I don't have like 10 notebooks with lyrics. I usually write um, from the song.
like
The, the,
like as it happens sort of thing.
yeah, yeah, as it happens. Or I mean, a lot of times, like with Invasion or something like that, I'll get a demo from our drummer with music, and then I sit down and I just sing over it
That's
until I
kind of
have
beautiful. That's kind of how it should be,
yeah,
really, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
rather
and
than
and
cobbling, like jigsawing in. Well, I mean, there's an
exactly,
argument for both. I think you can tell
yeah,
with this that the energy sparked the idea, kind of thing. So
exactly,
I
yeah,
think,
and then I think, as I said, subconsciously, like these grand songs demanded grand ideas. So
yeah. What? How would you want? How did you feel making them, and how did you want people to feel? What kind of emotion did you want to communicate? How would you describe the feeling? I feel like for me it was like joy and kind of optimism. And even if you're kind of shouting about stuff and it's heavy, it's like there
yeah,
was something very joyful about it for me. I don't know whether that's your energy, or I know it's not all la la la, but I just felt it made me feel very joyful when I first
that
started.
is great.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't a joyful experience at all.
No.
It was a horrible experience, and I think a lot of it was born out of angst and anguish and anxiety and
So
and
it makes no
and
sense that
anger.
it makes
Yeah,
no
no, no,
sense that I
no,
got this out of it. Yeah.
but that's I love. There's something about like the way we consume art that I find absolutely beautiful, where you're like, this is what I get out of this. And then someone's like, oh no, that was super depressing when I wrote it. And you're like, no, that's not what I feel.
I didn't, yeah,
And I
I didn't
think
hear that
that,
at all.
no, but
You transmuted it. So there's something about the alchemy of the music and the words that something was transmuted into something else.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that is true because I mean, I don't write cynically and I don't write like from a perspective of defeatism. It's always like the idea and the possibility of a better world is always present.
Mm.
And I think that's where the optimism comes from. Even like the process in itself was quite painful. Like you still at the end of the day, you see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's kind of always try to write. Like if you write about bad stuff and then you're like, I need a couple last lines. You need something to switch it and be like, oh no, there is hope.
Yeah.
There's
The twist,
so
the
I
plot
think there's a
twist.
lot of that. I think there is a sense of urgency and a sense of revolution to the music and
Mm.
and the lyrics that makes sense. But it wasn't a
Yeah.
it was a horrible experience.
Did you cry?
Yeah, I did
Yeah, that
cry. I
was.
went I went home from the studio many nights crying on my couch in anger, and also you're screaming. You come into the studio and you scream your head off. So most days I left the studio. I had such searing headaches because of the screaming that I was like, I just lay down on my couch and I'm like, I can't move because I was so incapacitated from just screaming.
You were
No.
absolutely suffering. And I'm on the other end
Yeah.
of Australia 15 years later going, woo, this is a great time.
No, but that's
But
great.
yeah.
That's wonderful. And I think that um sometimes these great ideas, I mean, because I have to. I'm not gonna. Uh, Everyone was suffering. It wasn't me. I wasn't the only one suffering. Like the four of us were not having a great time. But it's also conducive to something that
Yeah.
becomes quite exciting because there's all these tension. And as I said, like you have these tension, people pulling in different directions, people wanting different things, and
Mm.
you manage to keep it together, and all this tension, all this anguish and anger becomes a coherent piece of work, which sometimes it doesn't. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you hear a record, you're like, oh no, that's kind of a mess. And I mean, we did put out a record that, as I said, if we would try to do it 6 months later, it would have been a complete mess. But
It's
time
interesting.
to
Hey,
play
it's
magic.
when you say you were having a really hard time, was it the dynamic between each other, or were you having external pressures that were kind of coming into
No,
the
no,
experience?
just within the band.
Just
And I
between,
mean,
yeah.
we did have a record label that, I mean, we went over budget and we were
Yeah.
supposed to be in the studio for like 2.5 weeks and we were there for a month. And, like there was a little bit of that, but the mostly was just like bad vibes.
What did you love and hate? What did you love and hate about each other at this moment?
Um, I don't know. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's a bit too. Yeah, we won't like
yeah,
take you
I
into
mean,
the pain and suffering.
it's
Yeah.
weird because nowadays, I mean, when I think back on that record, because that's interesting. For years, that record was equated for me with suffering and pain, and also failure because
Hmm.
we broke up before anyone really cared about that record. And now, when I think about that record and I think about that time, yes, I do remember suffering, but the joy that that record brought me in life and is still bringing me when we play New Noise every night, it overweighs the
Mm.
pain and the suffering that I felt for like 3 months in 1997. And I mean, the positives so much outweighs the negatives now. So
Mm.
it is hard for me to be like, I mean, I remember it, but
Yeah. The art
like
is so interesting. Hey, oh, it's like
yeah,
how all our like I was listening to something recently, and they're just like all of our memories are wrong. Like the way we remember things is completely wrong. It's not what happened. Like our
yeah,
lens gets distorted and distorted and distorted. When was
yeah,
like a lot of the emo bands like stole your look and stole, you know, your sound and stuff, and the whole screamo emo thing. What
yeah.
was your take on all of that? And do you remember, was there a particular musician that reached out to you and you're like, what is going on? What is this crazy business?
No,
No,
um,
that
I
question, that question
no,
failed.
no.
Yeah.
So when all that was happening, I was in a band called the International Noise Conspiracy.
Yep, yep.
I was into soul music and garage rock and 60s psychedelia. I didn't pay attention to what was going on.
You
I
didn't
mean,
know
I
what was going on.
friends that were like, "Oh, these guys totally ripped up Refused," and I'm like, "No, I don't know. Maybe they did. I don't really." And I also think as a musician, when you're from the north of Sweden,
Mm.
you don't bang your own drum that much. You're like, I mean, it is weird for me to. Oh, we're still talking about this record. It's kind of crazy, but
Like right now.
no,
Yeah.
I don't. You don't bang your drum that much. So even sometimes where it kind of was obvious, I'm like, nah, I'm sure they've heard some other bands that sounds like us because it's as I said, it was a short period of time, and then you move on and you do something different, and you move on with life, and then I
Mm.
my mind wasn't at that place. So when a lot of that stuff was happening, I was like into different kind. I was like,
In
I'm
another
listening to James
universe.
Brown. I don't really care about emo bands at the
Yeah.
moment.
James Brown.
Sorry.
I once saw James Brown and they turned him down. They had noise complaints. It was in a fancy neighborhood. That's wrong. That's not
Yeah,
okay.
that's wrong.
It's
Yeah,
not
that's
it's
not
not an
okay.
okay thing. But it's funny, like screaming, I just think is such an interesting thing, like the history of screaming, like who screamed first? And like just the psychological impact of it compared to
Yeah.
singing. It's just such a like, do you remember when you first heard it and it struck you and you were like, what is this crazy business? Because it does have,
No.
I don't know, like there's entire styles of music completely built on that as the vehicle. And often I
Yeah.
have no idea what people are saying, and it's hard for me
Yeah.
as someone who likes
I
to
mean,
know the words.
I guess metal and particularly maybe like death metal,
Mm,
that's when like screaming became like not singing. Because I
yeah.
mean, even early hardcore and punk, I mean, people were singing. It
Mm,
was singing, and even so, when we did our first EP with Refused, and
hmm.
this is uh, the producer or the guy that recorded it said, there's a local band called Breach that just started. They were fantastic, and they played really heavy metal tinged hardcore,
Hmm.
and the singer was screaming, like
Yeah,
really
right.
screaming. And Pele, the producer of the first Refused EP, he told, because the first two Refused demos, I'm singing or shouting, whatever, you know. And then he said, "You're not doing any of the singing. You should just scream." So he actually told me just scream. So on the first Refused EP, that's when I started screaming,
Yeah.
and that became my thing. And I was pretty good at it. And then I hone in. The first record sounds pretty wonky, and some of the EPs, but then on songs to Fan the Flames, I was a great screamer, and you could scream in pitch, and you could scream with melodies. And then when we did Shape, I am singing. There's falsetto, and there's screaming, and there's all these using your voice more as an instrument.
Mm.
And it was interesting because now I'm a pretty decent singer. Like I
Yeah.
can actually
You are a
sing
pretty
pretty
decent
well.
singer. Yep,
Yeah, I'm a pretty
yeah,
decent
it's pretty
singer, but
good.
I'm also a great screamer, so I
Yeah.
can use my voice in all these different things, which is kind of cool. And but yeah, I remember in the studio when he was like, "No, scream," and I'm like, oh, "Okay," and I just started screaming, and then that stuck.
That was that. Yeah. Screaming is
That was
great.
that.
What
Yeah.
I was reading like a review of and listened to it, it's pretty weird. The Shape of Jazz to Come, and they said artists everywhere have taken courage from his example to try and pursue the freshest, most honest and uncliched ideas. What would you
Hmm.
say are the freshest, most honest and uncliched ideas that you kind of messed with on this? That feels like an essay question. I feel
Ooh.
like I've just gone to school with you just then, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but it's because I mean, there's I mean, the history of rock music has now been going on since 1950s, which is
wild, hey.
75 years
Yeah.
of rock music.
Yeah.
Um, the chord progressions have all been done. Most of the melodies have been done. So I think that what you need to do is you find your own little unique touch. And I
Mm.
think when we did Shape, I think that some of the compositions, a lot of the riffs, and the way we constructed songs just felt fresh and unique because we were like, no one's really done it like this before. Um, but I do, at the end of the day, as you said, it's a philosophical question because I think every band that wants to be, push themselves
Mm.
struggles with that. What is the fresh? What is the unique idea? What makes you different from all these other bands? And I mean, that's something. I mean, still to this day, when we talk about Refused or songwriting or different projects like that, that is the question. I mean, and sometimes you start a band and you say, this band should just sound like the Dead Kennedys, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But then sometimes you start a band and you say, here's something where we want to push the boundaries.
Yeah, well, it's like Slayer. Like Harry
Yeah.
King told me once, he's like, I'm perfectly fine with being the AC/DC of heavy metal. I will just make the same album over and over again, and I'll be very happy with it. And I'm like, there's a lot of people very happy with you for that.
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas a
yeah.
lot of other, that's one way. Um, it's I think evolution is really interesting, and I think what kind of role did you see electronic music playing in this album? Because I think it plays like it has some really interesting ways it
Yeah.
interacts with the song. I thought that was quite like the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, this is quite revolutionary because usually my electronic music listening and my heavy metal and punk rock listening are
Yeah.
separate. And I was like, whew, look at you arriving in my song like this. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
what kind of role emotionally as well, like sonically, like aesthetically even?
I think that I mean, a couple of people in the band was really into electronic music, drum and bass, jungle music, but also, I mean, I think that um, band like Prodigy or maybe even Atari Teenage Riot, you shouldn't
Yeah,
take
yeah,
away that.
yeah.
yeah, you shouldn't take away that influence of like really heavy electronic music that sort of fused a little bit rock music.
Mm,
And also, I think it mattered for us. It was a lot of about texture,
mhm,
not so much that like, oh, look at us, we know electronic music, but to add the different textures to the music, so it made it more dynamic. And I mean,
mm,
you have the sort of weird electronic beat intro after the intro for New Noise,
mm,
and you then when the song kicks in, it's so big because you have this weird electronic interest. I think for us it was a lot about dealing with textures,
mm.
but yeah, a couple of the people in the band was really into like that type of music and how do you fuse what we do and then sprinkle a little bit of these electronic elements. And I mean, it is interesting because something like my band Invasion, we nowadays we use tons of electronic music, but we try to fuse it with the music so it doesn't sound like we're like, oh, we're mixing electronic
Yeah,
music with
yeah, yeah.
rock music.
Here's a
Well, it
flourish.
feels, yeah, it
Yeah.
feels more like it's a natural thing to do. And nowadays,
Mm,
I don't think it's not a big deal when you use backing tracks or you use,
mm.
these percussive elements and stuff like that. But yeah, back in the day when we did it with Refused, there wasn't a whole lot of people. As I said, there was a couple of electronic acts that incorporated some rock music, but very few rock acts that incorporated that
Yeah.
electronic. Yeah.
And I imagine that would have gone down weird at a hardcore show. And that maybe was, yeah, like it might have been like, whoa, this is a wild and there's
Yeah, and
something,
also I
yeah.
think in those days we didn't really. It's interesting because we didn't have the technology to do pull that off live.
Mm,
We tried and we had like the sound guy had like an ADAT player that he to press play when electronic. I mean, it was just it didn't really work out because
yeah.
we didn't, so we didn't
Yeah.
when we go to tour in '98, it's like all the electronic elements sounded super janky. We're like, oh, it's not working out. But nowadays, yeah, like drum pads and you can sample stuff and it's much easier to use those elements nowadays.
Yeah, I haven't actually talked about the production. What was kind of unique about the production on this? I was it quite lo-fi or quite analog or like what was
So an interesting thing that not a whole lot of people know about this record is that it's we used a lot of computer.
yeah,
We used
right.
a lot of early Pro Tools programs, especially to have the dynamics of the drums. So we could record a small drum kit and we could edit it and then record a big drum kit and we could piece it together. So it sounds live, but it's like two different drum kits. So we
Yeah, right.
used a lot of early Pro Tools on this record to sort of construct it the way it was constructed. And I mean,
Mm,
the studio was super nice. It wasn't like a lo-fi production. It was very like the latest in
connect.
studio art, the latest in that type of technology, and a fucking beautiful, beautiful mixing desk in a big studio, and really like we put a lot of time and effort into making the record sound great,
Mm,
which I still think it
which
does. It still
which it
sounds
does.
pretty powerful. Yeah.
What was your happiest moment in the mix? In the mixing session where you're like, "Oh, this sounds huge."
Well, I think the dynamics of it is what made it the most exciting. I
Yeah.
mean, you have a song like Liberation Frequency, and that's one of those songs where there's like a small drum kit on the verses, and then there's a big drum kit on the chorus, and you can hear it when you're like, holy shit, this sounds really powerful. Like the when the chorus kicks in, it's so big.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of that stuff just felt really cool and really powerful and still does. Like still when you hear that and when you play it live, you're like, oh, that's kind of crazy how we play so much with dynamics.
How did we want the airwaves back on Liberation Frequency? That's a great repeated refrain. That's fun. I want the
Yeah.
airwaves back. Where did you
Yeah.
want them back from? Tell me
Well,
how did this kind of where did you want them
I,
back from? Where did you want them back? They were
well, I
somewhere.
mean, it is a reference to Ramones. We want the
Yeah.
airwaves.
Oh, duh.
That's right. So it's a reference to that, and then it's a reference to like I think the idea of like once upon a time rock music was considered dangerous and
Yeah.
like it was yeah and maybe radio as a medium was more in the hands of the people and now it's like corporate sellout
And there were
and
characters. They were like I was reading this Cramps book and Lux Interior's talking about, yeah, like when it was like they pretty much almost wanted to outlaw it when it was, especially
Yeah,
when it's coming
yeah,
from like black artists who they thought were
exactly.
very,
Yeah,
very overly sexualized and very, this is very dangerous. What is going on? And then like white artists would cover these songs and that's how they would get on the radio. So, because that was
yep,
just too edgy and too out there. And I
yeah.
don't know, it's kind of interesting to, do you think it, do you make music for provocation? Like, do you want people to,
Yes.
yeah, good. You want people
Not
to,
all the time,
what's,
but
but a
I mean, sometimes, um, I mean, this is especially maybe especially true for a band like Refused.
bit.
A lot of my other projects, I mean, I do a lot of different stuff, and some of the stuff I just want to write a beautiful song, or I just want to write a really catchy punk song, or but a lot of times we refused when we talk about lyrics and we talk about like the approach. Yeah, a lot of it is for provocation. A lot of it is it's quite humorous, but it's also really like a fuck you kind of statement.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of lyrics. I mean, even on the last two Refused records are quite like the intent is to make people go like, "What the fuck?" Like, and
which is good.
yeah,
You want people
which
to
I
think.
it's
That's,
good.
so much music,
Yeah,
elevator music, so much music.
yeah.
Like you can, I just feel like, yeah, I just feel like so much of pop music is just a vehicle for vocals. How would you write a love letter to that album from now?
The legacy is the fact that 27 years after the record came out, we're still talking about it, which I never thought that was going to be an issue. Like I thought in my mind, you put out a record, comes out, and then you move on, the world moves on.
Mm,
Um, I mean, that is the legacy. And I think what we did with the 25-year anniversary with the Shape of Punk to come obliterated,
mm.
that's the legacy. Like all those bands that were like, we asked them, do you want to do Refuse cover? Everyone's like, yes. Immediately, everyone said yes. I mean, that's the legacy. That right there, that record still holds up, that record is still being talked about, that those songs, when we play them live, people still go crazy for another 8 months. And then
Well, thank you. Thanks
thank
for
you.
being on We Wreck Records.